they caught there was 185 pounds on the linen line, knuckle buster reels, and hickory rods. They're not new. They've been here. They've been here for a long, long time.
Wow.
Just now we have technology.
Mm-hmm.
We have little things called GPSs.
Waypoints.
Eyes in the sky, and plotters and the sonar sounders and the color and the this and the that. Again,
Mm-hmm.
I asked a buddy of mine, Don Sansom, who, he was an incredible fisherman. When he had the qualifier about, like that lower bank stuff, which is starting to get in there again this year.
Mm-hmm.
Those 200 or 300 pound fish. I said, did you ever see that stuff when you were down there? We never would have known it because we didn't have the equipment. He said the same thing, that example I gave about, 300 feet and 100 feet down. He said, that's where that example comes from.
Yeah.
Unless there were porpoise on it or birds or something, we wouldn't know it was there.
Yeah.
So
Have you done some-
technology has really changed it, yeah.
Have you done some long range fishing yourself?
Oh, I've done it off and on for years. I used to do those 15-day trips quite a bit. Not so much anymore, just because they've shut everything down.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, and this is just my personal opinion, but I don't really want to go sit at the hurricane bank for 7 days.
Yeah. Have you made it over towards like Clipperton or anything?
I did a Clipperton trip way back when.
Yeah.
Yeah. Not too long. I mean, and it wasn't any better fishing than Clarion or Benedicto or anything like that.
How many days was that?
23 or 24.
Wow.
I was gonna say it's like the better part of a month.
It's a while.
Yeah.
It's, you go down and we'd stop at Benedicto on the way down, make a bunch of caballito. And then it was another, I think, 3 or 4 days to Clipperton, It's 3.5 days to Benedicto. So it's it's 7 days.
A week. Yeah. It's crazy. Well, Danny, before we get more along here, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and really how you kind of came to be the Danny Wade that we know.
My dad started me doing this. Imperial Beach Pier, catching bonito,
Nice.
and all that kind of stuff. He was halibut fishing, I was bonito fishing. Eventually, they had what they used to call a barge, an old sport boat that Imperial Beach sport fishing would, during the summer, would put out like the traditional sand bass area down there in IB.
Mm-hmm.
And for, I don't know, $1 or $2, whatever it was, and you could get on a boat, go out to the barge, fish there for an hour, for 2 hours, for all day, and do it, so it was cheap and it was entertaining, and that was the first experience of fishing on a boat. And then, eventually the half-day boats, and started pinheaded on the Imperial Beach boat. That's where I first met Chuck Taff. He was running the boat when I was a kid down there. And came up, did a little work on the Malahaney in the H&M 85 way back when. Eventually realized that just being on the boat's not for me, and especially my size and back in those time frames. I got tired of sleeping in a 6'2" bunk and being almost 6'6", So
I can only imagine. I mean, especially back then. I mean, now we're very spoiled in terms of on some of the boats, but back then, I mean, there must have been just straight out like
it
bunks.
was tough. Yeah, I mean, the Malahaney was tough because that was a conversion from a PT boat. But,
Right.
But so and I was just fishing all the way, and I mean, it went to San Diego, and according to my dad, it was 1965. So I was right about 7 years old. Caught my first yellowtail, and I caught it on a 6X Junior.
Nice.
And I've been stuck ever since.
Do you still have that jig?
No, I eventually broke. I caught quite a few fish on it, but it was the only jig I had. I think my dad or somebody gave it to me for like a Christmas present or a birthday present or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, even my mom had influence with me going fishing because, again, I remember tiny bits of it. But when I was a little tiny kid, this is like 3, 4 years old, my brother and my dad would come back from fishing somewhere and they had these fish, and I was just all about it.
Mm-hmm.
So what she would do when, and again, my sisters and brothers my sisters are 7 years older, my brother's 5. So I was the only kid at home. And, she'd go out to hang the laundry on the clothesline out back. And she'd fill up a bucket of water, and there was a little chair and a little bamboo stick, and she'd tie a string on it, put clothespins on. And I remember sitting there and dipping that thing up and down in the water. That tells you how weird I am. But that's kind of how it started. The jig thing, it was, again, I even remember my dad's, we used to go fish opala up over by Hill Street, Sunset Cliffs, during the winter. And my dad said, that's this yellowtail, that's where we fish opala, that's Hill Street. So I've always had that reference. And my dad is the one who said, hey, cast that thing over there. And I caught a yellowtail. Back then I thought it was probably the biggest one in the world. I look back at it now, my sister's got the picture, but it might have been 5 pounds, But, it was a yellowtail.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
And the jig thing came along, especially on the Imperial Beach boat. I was doing it, I'd catch some fish here and there, but nothing like, the guys, And there was a guy named Jim Darlin who a very good fisherman, just, I don't care what, fishing a live bait, a surface iron, a yo-yo jig, fishing big baits in the lakes, catching big bass. He had it understood. And he was catching these yellowtail, and I'm not getting a bite, and he's seeing, I don't know, maybe he saw I was frustrated or something of that nature, but he said, Danny, sit down here, So he went and got a beer for himself and a Coke or a Pepsi for me, and he said, I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to pay attention. You just can't cast your jig out and wind it back. You got to learn to make it swim. You got to make your jig work. And I took that to heart, and it's very true. Anybody, you got to make it work. You just can't cast it out, wind it back. You got to make it do what it's supposed to do. And that's how it all started.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to I can catch as many fish on a bait as anybody. Anybody, doesn't matter. But I just would rather a long rod and a surface iron, and leave me alone in a bow. I'll be fine.
Well, speaking of which, you did bring a very good-looking setup here. Tell us a little bit about it, and is this your go-to setup?
It is now. I was a Harnell guy for a lot of years, but again, as I'm getting older, I am 66 now. I will be 67 next month. Those things get heavy.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. Those things get heavy, and you're on a bow of a boat or a boat for X amount of hours a day, and you're making 100, 200, 300 casts. It takes its toll. It wears on you. About a year or more, maybe longer. Oliver with Fishing Syndicate, he came to me at the day at the docks, and he asked me, I want you to play with something. I want you to try something. So he handed me a 90J in this S-Class. Now, the S-Class I can't get in until how it's constructed, all of that and this and that.
Yeah.
But all I know is that the rod is basically 20% lighter than anything comparable in your basic E-glass. 20% is a lot of weight over a course of 4, 5, 6, 7 hours, 8 hours.
Yeah, makes a difference.
So I started playing with it, caught some fish on it, and it's all right. Casts well. It fishes as well as any other long rod I've ever used, but it's just so much lighter. And same thing with the turn, the 500 turn too. It's excellent reel, good construction, but they're just lighter. This reel is lighter than your old Jigmaster. So it's just lighter. Oliver came to me this past day at the docks and asked me if I would be willing to let him use my name in a signature series, because I do use this thing. And I said, all right, So we worked a deal out, and at some point in time here, it should be sometime around the end of the year, very part of next year, but these are going to be available in whatever tackle shops and so on and so on.
Nice.
I recommend them. Again, I fish with what I think works well. I don't fish with, I get stuff given to me all the time. but this is what I fish with. You see me on a boat, you're going to see it. I may not have it in my hand at that exact time, but it's going to be in my hands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we've discussed at length to where each rod has its own purpose or
Yes.
use or
Yeah.
whatnot. And, it's like you don't bring one golf club to the golf course.
That's right.
Bring a whole set.
And that rod choice is different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
It's not, I don't believe there are rods that are one all and all be all. I
True.
mean, you have to go on the water.
Yep.
You can't just get a rod because, maybe if you're just, I feel like if you're just getting into fishing, your buddy says, hey, I think you should try this. Try it. If you
Yeah.
don't have it, try it.
Yeah.
And if it doesn't work for you, then you have some kind of basis where it's, okay, it's too stiff, or I don't like the bud. It's too skinny of a bud, or I want a bigger bud, or vice versa, or anything like that. You have to put time in.
Yeah.
True. Again, I get people, well, what rod should I buy? And again, I'm a guy who's 6'6", 300 pounds, just because I use a 10-foot rod doesn't mean that you have to. You got to find your comfort zone. The only thing I say about the S-Class is just, even if you go with the 90J, it's just so much lighter, and that's a big component, is how much it weighs. Because again, you're there for the duration, and you're making lots of casts, and you're spending a lot of time doing it. And again, I have pulled on, I can't tell you how many, on this outfit right here, and even with that jig right there, how many, I don't know, in the last 2.5 months, I don't know, somewhere 70 or more.
Well, speaking of jigs, I know this is going to probably spark a whole conversation, but when you're looking at a jig wall or picking out your next jigs, or hell, even your favorite and all that, is there anything that you're looking for in particular other than just looking at the hips or how it's constructed or anything?
Things have changed a lot. Back when everything was sandcast, you had to have an eye for it.
Yeah.
So, 7Xs have this look, and 45s have that look, and candy bar style jigs have this look, and the old thing where everybody gets into the offset hips with the left side being a little lower than the right side and all that, but that's a Tatty thing. That's a Tatty 45 and an A1 and a C thing. That's not a 7X thing. That's not a candy bar thing. It's different. So you had to get an eye for it, and you had to learn it. Now with some of the CNC stuff, especially. And again, I'm not trying to throw a brand out there, but what Matt Brala and Buddy Bowden are doing, the 2Js, those are good lures. The Big Irons, who's putting out this DSL-1 and the Legend, which I'm kind of behind that stuff, they're very good lures. I started this lure that's tied on this rod. Actually, that's the second one because I lost the first. Sea Lion took it from me.
Oh, that bastard.
But, again, in a 2.5 or so months or 3 months when these guys were really at the islands and I was gone quite a bit, I've caught 70 or so fish on this stuff, That's a lot of fish, going once a week.
Yeah.
Well, maybe twice a week. That's, that's limit style fishing every day.
Yeah.
And so it's a little easier now, They're more expensive because CNC, it's another process, and it's a highly involved process where sandcast is pour it in the sand, let it cool, cut them off the tree, drill some holes in them, clean them up on a sander, and put them in a tumbler and paint them and ring them, But the CNC stuff is a little different. But the thing about the CNC is, and I was never a big proponent of CNC for years and years.
Why
Because
was
they're
that?
just, you still got to make it from the right lure. You can CNC anything you want, but if you don't make it from the right lure, it doesn't work.
It's just a copy of the wrong
It's just
lure.
a copy of a lure that doesn't work.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's got to be, there's still, it's still got to be the right shape, and the right material. But a lot of the CNC stuff that was coming, especially, back in the beginning of it, they just weren't the right shape. I'm not going to get into names and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff, but yeah, so it's, like I say, but again, even though this DSL is the right shape and it works well, you still got to make it work. If the current's flowing, you got to slow it down. If the current's doing something else, you might have to speed it up. If you're coming down swell, you got to slow it down coming off the swell and speed it up coming down the back, coming down the backside. And so there's all kinds of, nothing. There is nothing that you can cast it out, wind it in, you're going to get a bite. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost like anything to where every circumstance or every day on the water is very different to all the other ones, to where you kind of have to evaluate what's going on and how you want to basically retrieve your jig at what speed or whatnot. Every situation is different. You just kind of have to sit there and evaluate to see what's going to work.
It can be different within hours.
Yeah.
In the same day. I could give Tony the greatest surface iron she'll ever own. And on this day and that day, she goes out and just whoops them, And 2 weeks later, she can't get a bite on it because something's changed.
Yeah.
And she hasn't compensated for that, or maybe you can't compensate for it. There are times when they just don't want it too, but there's always, it's never the same process the same way twice. It's always a little different, always a little different. Even the amount of line you have on your spool can make a difference. So,
Interesting. Is that mono? Yeah.
yeah.
So are you solely mono, or are you doing a braid backing?
Well, I got braid backing, but I can't cast to it. I don't want to not going through the line. You're on your own little skiff or whatever. You can do whatever you want on a sport boat. You should, and ask any of these guys that run these boats. They're going to tell you use mono.
Yeah.
It casts easier. You've got a stretch factor that comes into it. The backlashes are less. You get a backlash and braid, your jig just goes boom, it's gone. And you
Well,
get,
Darren knows what that's like.
Yes, I do.
and mono's forgiving. And it allows you to make a mistake even fighting the fish because you've got elasticity, there's a lot of guys who want to go use that, 4-foot piece of whatever and straight braid. I had a guy on the boat 2 weeks ago who came, he was having real difficulty with his Strength 500 and whatever long rod he had, and he kept getting backlash and breaking stuff off. And I said, "You got any mono?" "Yeah." "Well, wind it up." It'll say, and he, at the end of the day, "Wow, I never even thought about that," because everybody's trying to push the braid. Braid is good for a lot of things, but it's not good for everything. And if you're fishing, again, in your own private boat, you can do whatever you want. But on a sport boat, if you're not using monofilament, you're going to have issues. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. When with your amount of experience and all that, what kind of tips, if someone were to trying to get their feet wet in jig fishing or whatnot, and maybe has a little bit of trepidation or intimidation on going to the bow with people like yourself, what kind of tips could you give for those kind of people that just want to get into jig fishing in general?
Be patient.
Yeah.
Learn how to cast. You need to learn how to cast before you get on the boat, not while you're on the boat. You'll learn technique while you're on the boat, but you need to learn how to cast. Again, my dad was alive, he'd be shaking his head, but I used to steal the 2-ounce weights out of his little tackle box and go out in the street after school and cast.
I was going to ask, so you did it on the street. I've heard of like golf courses.
We didn't have golf courses. The street is what we had. And at that time, everybody's at work, so there's really no traffic.
Yeah.
But I'd go out there and I'd learned how to cast. And eventually you move on to a boat or maybe a pier or something of that nature, and you cast. And even, I mean, my dad was a big, on the Imperial Beach Pier, and I'm sure it's most piers, but there are signs all over the place, no overhand casting. So I learned how to cast underhand.
Yeah.
And I mean, you've seen me on a boat, and I pitch a bait, and I flip it out underhand.
Mm-hmm.
And that bait just settles on the water instead of slapping on the water.
You don't fish bait, Danny. Come on.
Only offshore. And very rarely,
I think I've seen Danny touch a bait once
probably.
in 4 seasons.
But that's not as much fun.
That's probably to help some little kid get it on his hook.
But so you got to learn how to cast, and then you got to, I've done a lot of seminars and stuff where you're sitting on the bow of a boat and you're talking about doing this, and I always start out with safety,
Mm-hmm.
Pay attention to what your environment, what's behind you, Don't hit the bait tank, don't hit the bulkhead of the boat, don't do this. And sure enough, somebody hits, the bulkhead of the boat or something like that, the galley or something like that, and they, and you just look at them, well, if that was your son, you might not be ha-ha-ha-ha-ing about,
Yeah.
Right.
But learn how to do it, I mean, I don't know how much time anybody here has spent on a half-day boat, but you look back and you see a tackle box laying open, and it's a guy or a boat father, son, or whatever it is, and they probably go fishing 2 or 3 times a year. But there's a jig in that box, and that guy wants to catch fish on it.
Mm-hmm.
You got to learn how to do it, and you got to spend time doing it. Mm-hmm. If you look at the guys that are pretty good, whether it be crew members or just passengers, those guys have been doing it for a while, and they put their time in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it is. You got to learn. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson didn't become very excellent basketball players because they went once a year.
That is true.
True.
You got to put your time in.
Mm-hmm.
Start out, on a half-day boat and put your time in and get comfortable with it. And then you move on to, you've been casting baits for a while or plastics or whatever, and then move on to the surface iron and put your time in it. And you're going to also have to realize you're going to spend a lot of time not catching much until everything starts to click a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's all about putting your time in,
You've probably seen your fair share of, I'll just call them injuries or foul hooking people and all that stuff. Any tips or pointers on how to prevent all that stuff? I know whenever I'm on a sport boat or any boat for that matter, I'm very, I like to be conscientious about where that jig is going to be, and I have an eye on it all the way up until leading into my cast, to where I'm just so paranoid about hooking either someone or something.
That's it. You got to pay attention. You got to look behind you. You can't look behind you, then look at the water and then cast. You see your target, where your target is. You bring your rod up, you look behind you, you make your cast, and you follow that all the way through. So your head is just following the whole thing all the way through. There's going to be a tiny blind spot in there, but the blind spot's, 20 feet in the air.
Yeah.
So it doesn't really matter. But what's behind you, and you got to anticipate, that kid might just, so you might not make the cast.
Mm-hmm.
It's just a fish, it's not worth it. I was on a new Seaforth a few weeks ago, and this way we looked, buddy, you better start paying attention. Sure enough, he hooked his buddy, and right about kidney level on his face. Hooked his buddy.
Oh.
And it's just, well, part of this didn't you understand?
Yeah.
That's my issue is I'll grab my jig and walk up to the bow and there's too many people up there. I'll go fish bait for right now. The bow gets crowded with people.
Well, and it does. But if it gets crowded with people that understand what they're doing, then it works well.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's a learning process. It's very much a learning process.
Yeah.
The last trip I made on to San Diego, I said something to the guy. He was standing right dead nuts in the middle of the bow. And I looked at him and I said, you need to step up to the rail. Well, I'm not trying to make a cast. Yeah, but nobody can make a cast because you're standing in the middle
Yep.
of the casting zone. So, but they got to learn that,
Yeah.
And that's the same thing. So, and I'm like I say, I'm straightforward about it, man. You need to get your ass up here on the rail, and get out of everybody's way, because that's what you are. You can coddle them and say, well, if you do this, you do that, but no, move, get out of the way. A lot of crew members and captains will be the same way. Guy catches his first yellowtail on a jig and they stick it in the bow and they put it on a boat. Oh, get some freshy pictures, I've watched Ryan sit there and, hey, take that thing back by the bait tank, take some pictures by the bait tank so these guys can continue to fish.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's all kinds of stuff that goes into it, but it's just being aware of what's around you, I mean, again, the worst thing to do would be to make a cast and you hit the bulkhead or a bait tank or something like that and you laugh it off. You go to make a cast later on and you hit your daughter in the head.
Yep.
I've seen a lot of guys have fresh jewelry on their ears and on their face
Yep.
throughout the years, just not paying attention. Or they're letting too much line out and the jig is just swinging. They have no control over the pendulum of the jig.
Right.
And so it's just paying attention, and you're better off to learn that on a half-day boat, than trying to.
There's probably nobody on the bow on a half day boat, or almost next to nobody.
But there's not as many.
Not as many, yeah.
Yeah, not as many.
Yeah. Does it matter, or do you use kind of like, let me rephrase that. Is it more of a strategy when a boat has like an overhang or a slight overhang or not? Or you just kind of just roll with it?
You just learn how to cast, I can cast in any number of different manners and different ways, I can cast left-handed if need be.
Mm-hmm.
But you learn to avoid that kind of stuff. There are places on any given boat which are better than other places on that same boat. There aren't, there aren't a lot of boats that have a great big overhang, really. So, but there's a few. But you just learn how to avoid it, and
Yeah.
you can adjust your cast. So I was listening to the old Matt Brawley guy, runs to San Diego quite a bit, and I've known him since he was probably in junior high, give or take. But he used to pinhead on the New Seaforth quite a bit, and he was out there a lot watching. But even he'll say, I don't make a cast in any particular way. Depends on how many rods are around, depends on how many people are around. And you make a cast according to what you need to do. And I know that sounds like a cop-out, but it's very true. Because, if there's nobody up in the bottom, you're all by there, you can swing that thing around, do whatever you want.
Yeah.
But if you got 7 other people up there, it's a whole different story.
Right.
Yeah. And I know I think we know what we're talking about when you have an organized group where it's like everyone's just taking turns in rotation and all that. And that's
the people
best
that
case
do it on
scenario.
a regular basis, they get it,
Yeah.
And I, this may sound silly, but there's a jig fishing community where you know who that person is, but you may not necessarily know if they're married or they got kids or anything, but you know that they got an understanding. And you see them and you haven't seen them for a year, and it's kind of like, seeing your cousin,
Yeah.
Hey, how you been? What's going on? Where you been? How you been doing? What are you catching? That kind of thing. And you pick up where you left off. But, when it gets time to make that cast, we all know that there's a pecking order
Yeah.
just by who's standing where, not because it's an individual, but by who is standing where and what and so on. And especially on anchored fishing is a whole lot different. You can just kind of stand there and pay attention, do what you want. But running and gunning, you just don't stand there in the bow and make a cast and wind it back in. You got to slide down the boat because the boat's still sliding forward. So the next person can make a cast and they slide down. The next person makes a cast and they slide down, and so on and so on and so on. Even yo-yo fishing. You can't just drop it over the side. Well, this is where I'm standing. I'm gonna wind it back in, and your jig, an angle of 70 degrees and coming off the stern. But yeah, so but there's people get it. The people that do it on a regular basis, I don't care, male, female, big, tall, short, whatever. Doesn't matter. They see it, they understand it because they've done it. And it works out.
Personal preference question. Do you prefer the running and gunning style where you're chasing bird schools off the islands or whatnot? Or you kind of like to basically settle on the pick and just kind of ease your way into it and read the situation?
When you can be on the pick, that's where I want to be.
Yeah.
That's, and I hate to use this, but that's what separates the men from the boys.
Nice.
You understand the current, you understand the lay of the land, what ridge they're fishing on it, what end of the ridge they're fishing on it. And you know that if you are on this side of the boat with what the current is doing, this fish is going to come up over here. Now it will come up any given, but you know that it's going to come over here, and you just got to sit there and be ready for it. Instead of running to this side of the boat and that side of the boat and this side, and you know it's going to be there. And when you put the cast in the right place, you get bit. And those are the times when you're, I don't know, so you got 25 guys on any given boat, and you're on the hook, and you're sitting there, and you catch, say, 30 fish for, the last 2 hours, but you got 7 of them.
Nice.
That's a good feeling.
That's
Because you got it figured out.
that's the dream.
I mean, Danny, you've been such a mentor for so many people in this industry, myself included.
Well, thank you.
I never thought I'd be able to cast a surface iron because of my stature. I was so intimidated. And we've spoken a bunch of times,
Oh, yeah.
really, at the top of the dock, waiting for charter groups, and me just coming into the landing and asking you, hey, what do you do with this? Or what jig? Or what rod? I'm nervous about what rod I need to use. And you recommended rods that I still have to this day. I won't get rid of them. But, going back, who were the mentors in your life that, and you kind of touched on it before, but who are the mentors for you that you looked at and had all the questions and wanted to learn and be better in this certain style?
There were a lot of them. Again, my dad was a great influence in just fishing in general. He had kind of the John Wooden philosophy of be quick but don't hurry. Failure to prepare is preparing to fail. So again, not having good line on your reel, making sure your reels are working properly, and so on and so on. You don't do that, you hook a good one, you fail. Jim Darlin, the man I mentioned, real big time influence, especially on the surface iron. Because I knew, and as time went by, I knew that man I met him when I was probably 13-ish. And I knew him for the next 40 some years until he passed away. A man named Don Sansom, This lure, DSL, Don Sansom lure. That's what it stands for. There's a story behind that, but that's a different subject. Actually, that lure, I kicked his butt on a Malahin.
Nice.
And a lot of guys, Bill Shimizu, who's part of the Taddy family, he got me to understand the shape and why it worked, And he was good with a rod and reel. He was very good. And we fished together a lot on a Malahaney. He would come down. I was working in the landing by that time, but he would come down with his dad. I got to know his dad. I knew the old man. He was a nice guy. He had a sense of humor like you wouldn't believe, but he was a fishy guy, And I asked him, I don't know, but you hear about the kicking out, the jig kicking out. And I asked him about that, and he just, and in his, him and Hahn way, and he asked me if I'd ever watched like a Jacques Cousteau video, of bait in the water. Well, the bait swims around, it goes kind of inside, outside, outside, inside, and they're all trying to get protected in the middle without being eaten. And you see that yellowtail, that tuna, they skirt off to the side. They don't go shooting through the middle. They skirt off to the side. And you see those baits that they don't go the right direction. They go off in a different direction. They're the ones who get eaten. Well, that lure swims in a specific pattern that goes kick, 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 and then every so often it just kicks way off to the side. That's that bait getting out of the circle. And that's the trigger that makes them bite. But yeah, Jim Darlin, Bill Shimizu, Manny Silva, a guy named Harry Kawase. He was just a fisherman, just a little Japanese guy that was just, Danny, you might want to just slow down. But he was sharp,
Mm-hmm.
And another one would be Yo Shibuya. I met him on the Imperial Beach boat, and that's where I met him, but I knew him up here as well. So, and there's just paying attention to other people, I mean, I don't care who you are, on some given day, you're going to see somebody doing something on a boat, and you look at that and you go, whoa, that makes sense, whoa. And so you just absorb it, and those would be the guys that come to mind. I mean, there's been a lot of them, Bobby Taff was good with a long rod. He doesn't do it much anymore, but he's sharp.
Yeah.
His brother Chuck, back in the day, he was right in there. There are a lot of guys, Buzz Brizendine, Don Sansom, Alan Fay, who kind of rides under the radar. One of the few guys that still uses wire. I use wire on certain conditions. He uses it all the time. But that's what he's comfortable with, and if that's what works, then so be it.
Yeah. Was fishing always going to be part of your life growing up and all that?
It was going to be part of my life. I never had any anticipation of being in it for a living.
Yeah.
It just kind of happened.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something that you thought you would go into it for a living and all that, or was fishing always going to be?
It just ended up being fishing, just because it just the steps fell in line. I was out of it for quite a while, but not fully. I was always in it, but I was bartending for a while. And I was pretty good at that too, because I was quick. But it's I don't have any desire to ever do that again.
Well, Danny, this has been fascinating. Any big plans coming up? I know we're coming up on the end of 2024, but anything coming up in 2025 that we should be looking out for?
It's hard to say. I mean, nothing that I'm aware of as far as like what this landing is going to do or that landing is going to do or anything of that nature. Again, we'll see what goes on. We'll pay attention to it and see what happens. It's always a little different.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me if we have a pretty good spring at the islands, as long as there's boats willing to go there. We'll see about the offshore thing. Things are changing. Mother Nature is ever present. And we'll see.
In your experience, the thing that I've always said about 2024, it's almost beginning to normalize a little bit from what it used to be 10, 15 years ago and all that. Do you kind of foresee that happening, going on?
As time goes by, it will normalize. Depends on someone's definition of normalize. Again, I think catching albacore on 20 and 25, 30 pound is a very normal thing. But I grew up in that time frame. Where today, the only thing people know about albacore is you go to the store and you buy it in a can. But things change, so we'll see what happens. This bluefin has become the norm, but it's going to change, and it's going to not be quite so prevalent at some point in time. And maybe that albie slides back down the coast, and things will change, you know. As again, you know, when I was working on boats and much younger man, the Coronado Islands was for a lot of times, especially in the spring and late winter, it was a squid fishery. We'd go out and make squid almost every night. On the way out, fish all day, get your people off the boat, get the boat titivated. By say 7 o'clock, you were headed back out to the islands to go get squid. Because if you were out or you ran out, all you did is watch.
Yeah.
And that was that was a tedious thing. At some point in time, that's gonna reoccur. And that's when the winter and spring fishery gets stupidly good.
Yeah.
Because it's not good for what I want to do. Surface iron thing. But you know, it's 25, 30, 40 pound with a 2-0 hook and a weight. Get it close to the bottom and just make sure you leave it there.
Yeah.
When they swim through, they will bite it. But so, you know, I don't ever see a normalcy, you know, shall we say. But you get used to the way things are. And then Mother Nature changes it.
Yep. Yeah. Always.
I hope, you know, the bass fishery, you know, calico bass fishery hasn't been stupidly great here the last handful of years. Not because there's no bass. It's just because it's Mother Nature, you know. Conditions aren't what you would like it to be. Other problem was, you know, calico bass really go on anchovies and things of that nature. And the bait company, because the majority of the boats want sardines for this offshore stuff, where the half-day guys are, you know, they'd really like to have some anchovy. And that's what makes them bite. And when you got this stuff, man, they get stupid.
Yeah. Yeah.
But so it's all about whatever's going on, you know, what's available and so on. I to try and plan what's going to happen next year, hopefully you plan for the best.
Yeah.
But, you know, who knows?
Yep, that is for sure. Well, Danny, thank you so much for coming in. We really appreciate the conversation and coming up. And then if someone were to need some advice on jig sticks or anything like that, how does one find you?
Well, I'm at H&M. As a rule, what is it, Thursday through Monday?
Okay.
Yeah. You know, noonish, give or take, until we close at whatever time that is. And if you're not afraid of my abruptness and so on, come on in. If you want a straight answer, I'll give it to you.
Yeah.
I'm not going to pet your hand and, you know, because, and I'm, again, you know, whether you buy a jig from me or from the landing, it's up to you. I don't really care. Whether you buy a rod and reel or something, it's up to you. My life won't change, but I'll give you the truth. I won't, you know. Again, I don't get anything if you buy something. If you want it, buy it. If you think it's going to work for you, buy it. If my advice helps you, good. If it doesn't, sorry. Yeah, but
Not your fault.
but yeah, you know, so yeah, it's not a high pressure sales. You don't have to buy it if you don't want it.
Yeah.
But again, this whole long rod thing and stuff like that, you just got to find what works for you. You were talking your stature. Montera, Ray Montera. That guy was 5 foot on a good day. And he fished a long rod as well as anybody because he learned how to do it. He could cast as far as anybody. He could do anything as far as anybody. But he just learned how to do it. So I'm doing it forever and ever and ever and ever. So anybody can learn how to do it. You got to put your time in.
Yep. I think that's the overall theme. Just you got to put your time in and just go fishing.
That's
basically.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Get on a boat.
Yep, for sure.
Get on a boat.
Well, Danny, thank you so much for stopping by. Really do appreciate it.
You're
And
welcome.
hope to see you again soon.
I'm around. You know where I am.
Awesome. Well, that's going to do it for this edition of the CCA California podcast. Make sure to go follow us on Instagram at CCA California and make sure to subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. And with that, we will see you guys next week. Take care.